Okay, so are you ready to dive in? Because today we're looking at um, what a Trump presidency round two could mean for the world.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
Right. It's a lot to unpack. We've got campaign speeches, we've got expert opinions, and we've got, his past actions to look at.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this so fascinating is that we're not just speculating here. We can actually look back at his track record
Yeah.
and kind of get a glimpse into how he might approach things if he gets back in the Oval Office.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that his America First approach really shook things up the first time around.
Oh, absolutely.
So if he gets a second term, it's likely to be just as impactful globally.
No doubt.
So let's jump right in and start with the issue that's on everyone's mind, the war in Ukraine.
Right.
Trump has said repeatedly
Yeah.
that he could end the war in a day, which is quite a statement.
It is a bold claim.
It is. What's the strategy there? Is there any substance to that?
Well, a couple of his former national security advisors actually published a research paper outlining a potential path, and they suggest continuing U.S. military support for Ukraine, which is in line with current policy,
Yep.
but making that aid conditional on Kyiv entering peace talks with Russia.
So using the aid as leverage to get both sides to the table.
Exactly.
That makes sense tactically,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing it's not that simple.
Well, the really controversial part is what they propose offering Russia
Okay.
a promise to delay Ukraine's entry into NATO,
Wow.
basically saying, stand down and we'll hold back NATO expansion.
So that's a big concession.
It is.
I mean, talk about real politics.
Yeah, it's aiming for peace, but potentially at the cost of emboldening Russia and jeopardizing Ukraine's sovereignty.
So does this reward Putin's aggression?
That's the concern.
And what message does it send to other countries who might be considering similar moves?
Well, those are precisely the concerns voiced by Trump's critics, especially on the Democratic side.
Sure.
They see it as appeasement, a
Right.
dangerous precedent that could backfire.
But it also really speaks to the heart of Trump's foreign policy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's America first.
It's absolutely.
It's limit entanglement in overseas conflicts
Right.
and worry less about what the broader global implications are.
It's about prioritizing U.S. interests above all else.
It's like saying, let's stop the bleeding bull, get America out of the equation, and let the rest of the world figure it out.
Oh.
Which kind of brings us to another big question mark. NATO.
Yes.
Trump has a long history of criticizing NATO,
Yeah.
even suggesting it's obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
Is there real chance he might try to pull the U.S. out?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Right.
It has experts and world leaders on edge.
I bet.
Some see it as a negotiating tactic, the art of the deal approach.
Uh-huh.
He used to pressure NATO allies to increase their defense spending.
Like pay up or we're out.
Exactly.
But even the threat of the U.S. withdrawing from NATO is enough to send shockwaves through the entire international system.
Oh, absolutely.
It throws everything into question. Alliances, defense strategies, the whole global balance of power.
It undermines trust.
Yeah.
It sows discord among allies, and it emboldens adversaries.
It's a high-stakes game of brinkmanship.
It is.
So from a potentially fractured Europe, let's shift gears and look at another incredibly volatile region, the Middle East.
Okay.
Trump says he would have prevented the recent Hamas attack on Israel.
Mm.
His argument is that his tough stance on Iran, their primary backer, would have acted as a deterrent.
Right.
Can you unpack that a little? What exactly was his maximum pressure approach all about?
Well, it was multi-pronged. It involved several tactics.
Okay.
He pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. He slapped on some of the toughest sanctions in history. And he even authorized the targeted killing of Qasem Soleimani, a top Iranian general.
So a very aggressive approach.
It was a high-stakes gamble designed to cripple Iran's economy and force them to the negotiating table.
He definitely wasn't afraid to take bold and controversial action.
No, he wasn't.
And we can't forget his staunchly pro-Israel stance, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
Right.
It was a move that thrilled his base, but was met with international criticism.
Yeah. A lot of controversy there.
How might all of this history, this very strong stance, affect his approach to the current conflict?
Right.
And could it actually help to de-escalate things?
Well, it's a really complex picture. On the one hand, Trump has developed relationships with both Israeli and Arab leaders who actually have some leverage over Hamas
Okay.
that could give him a unique ability to act as a mediator,
Right.
a role he seems to relish. But on the other hand, there's his unpredictability,
Right.
that same art of the deal approach. that willingness to kind of throw out the rule book.
Yeah.
It makes him a bit of a wild card in a region that's already incredibly volatile.
It's tough to say whether that boldness would, bring people together or make things even worse.
Exactly. It's a real gamble.
And then there's that stalled Gaza ceasefire deal.
Right.
Will he try to revive it, build on the progress that's been made, or just scrap it entirely and go in a totally different direction?
It's hard to say. I mean, he's full of surprises.
It feels like there's potential for both a breakthrough and a total meltdown.
Definitely high stakes no matter what he does.
Speaking of high stakes, let's talk about China.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
Trump's history with China is anything but boring.
That's for sure.
He's called them a strategic competitor. He's imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of goods. He even blamed them for the COVID-19 pandemic.
Why? A lot of tension there.
So are things going to get even more heated if he's back in the White House?
Well, it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
The tariffs he imposed during his first term, they hurt both economies.
Right. They raised prices for consumers.
Exactly. And they disrupted supply chains.
And then the pandemic just threw gasoline on the fire.
Yeah, it really intensified that rivalry and fueled mistrust.
What's interesting to me is how Trump sees China's leader, Xi Jinping.
Right.
He's described him as both brilliant and dangerous. A highly effective leader, but one who operates with an iron fist.
It's an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
It's a grudging respect, but also deep suspicion. I wonder how that personal dynamic, that mix of admiration and distrust, might influence their interactions.
Right, how it might affect things like trade negotiations or the handling of global crises.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the Taiwan issue.
Yeah, one of the most volatile flashpoints in the world.
Trump has hinted that he wouldn't automatically use military force to defend Taiwan against a Chinese blockade.
Right. He suggested economic pressure as a primary tool.
So instead of sending in the U.S. Navy, he'd hit China, where it really hurts their economy.
That's the idea.
But is that really a credible deterrent? I mean, could economic sanctions alone really stop a military superpower that's determined to achieve its objectives?
It's a big gamble for sure.
It is.
He's essentially betting that the threat of severe economic consequences would be enough to make China back down.
If it works, it could prevent a catastrophic conflict.
Right.
But if it fails,
the fallout could be disastrous, not just for the U.S. and China, but for the entire global economy.
it's like a game of chicken with the potential to trigger a worldwide recession or even worse.
It's a risky strategy, no doubt.
And how would the rest of the world react? Would they side with the U.S. and support these aggressive tactics, or would it further isolate America?
That's a key question. You know, Trump's America First agenda, it often prioritizes U.S. interests, even if it means going against the wishes of allies or disrupting established international norms.
We saw that during his first term, and it seems like that pattern might continue.
Yeah, it's definitely something to watch closely.
It could lead to a more fragmented world, with countries having to choose sides and traditional alliances weakening.
It's a real possibility.
So stepping back from the specifics for a minute, what does all of this mean for the average person listening? What's the big picture takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that a Trump presidency would undoubtedly shake things up on a global scale.
We've seen that before.
We have. The question is whether that shakeup leads to greater stability, like he claims, or plunges us into a period of heightened uncertainty and conflict.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around. And to be honest, it's a little unnerving to think about the potential consequences.
It is. There's a lot at stake.
What stands out to you as the most surprising or maybe concerning aspect of all of this?
I think for me, it's the unpredictability, you know?
Yeah.
Trump has shown that he's willing to just completely overturn decades of foreign policy, you know, make bold pronouncements and take actions that nobody expects.
Right.
He thrives on disruption.
He does.
And that makes it really tough to figure out what he's going to do next.
It's like a high-stakes poker game where the rules keep changing in the middle of the hand.
Exactly.
And we're not just talking about, political wins and losses here. We're talking about the potential for war, for economic upheaval, for a seismic shift in the global balance of power.
The stakes are incredibly high.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
It can be a little daunting.
It's important to understand his past actions, his core beliefs, the people he surrounds himself with.
Right. Those are the clues that can help us kind of decipher what a Trump presidency might actually look like.
Exactly.
How it could impact our lives.
Right. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing and the picture keeps changing.
We have to look for patterns, analyze his rhetoric, and really try to connect the dots.
We need to look beyond the headlines, beyond the sound bites, and really delve into the complexities.
And that's what we're trying to do here, right?
Yeah.
To equip ourselves with the knowledge and the insights to, make informed decisions, engage in meaningful conversations about the future.
Exactly. It's not about pretending to have all the answers.
Right.
It's about asking the right questions, challenging assumptions, and being open to different perspectives.
Acknowledging the uncertainties and embracing the complexity.
Because there are rarely easy answers when it comes to global affairs.
Right.
It's always difficult choices with, far-reaching consequences.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. But it also highlights how important it is to stay engaged, to participate in these discussions, and to recognize that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Absolutely, whether it's through our votes, our actions, or even just the conversations we have with each other. We all have a stake in the outcome.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a thought-provoking journey, and I hope it's left you with more questions than answers.
That's the goal.
Because ultimately, the pursuit of understanding is an ongoing process.
It is. It's a continuous exploration.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. We'll be here to guide you along the way. Until next time, stay curious.